Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our final Mary Talk of the season. My name is Beth Hunsinger. I am a member of the class of 2001, and I'm the Director of Annual Giving here at the University of Mary Washington. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's Mary Talk featuring Carolyn Parsons as she presents Exploring the Treasures of UMW's Special Collections and University Archives. We are excited to welcome all participants of tonight's lecture, including those of you in the room with us, as well as a sizable virtual audience across the country and beyond joining us online tonight. Before we begin, a few words about tonight's presenter. Carolyn Parsons has overseen Mary Washington's records and artifacts for the past 15 years as head of special collections and university archives. A UMW Historic Preservation graduate and third-generation legacy alum, Parsons attained her MSLS from the University of Kentucky. After working for both the National Park Service and the Library of Virginia, her career path brought her full circle back to her alma mater. Last year, Parsons was the recipient of UMW's Teaching Excellence Award for adjunct faculty. Her favorite archival formats are photographs and scrapbooks, and she readily admits having a fondness for in-depth reference questions and Mary Washington memorabilia. There will be time after Carolyn's talk tonight to ask questions, so please keep that in mind as you listen to her presentation. And now, please join me in offering a warm welcome to Carolyn Parsons.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me tonight here, those in the audience and also our guests online. I know it's March Madness basketball time, so I know I'm competing with that, and we'll also be sure to wrap up so some of you can at least get in maybe that final game. So for our dedicated Mary Washington fans, I'll be sharing tonight with you the treasures, both old and new, of special collections and university archives. As I was preparing for this talk, I realized that 111 years of Mary Washington history is a lot of history, and also that correlates to a lot of individual artifacts and items. So how does one actually select which of these items will get the spotlight and be shown tonight? In a sense, the Academy Awards of the archives, as each has its own very personal and unique story. So I decided to lean more to the older materials in the archives and also to map out tonight's collections by showing you some of the various types of materials we have. Special Collections and University Archives maintains a variety of print and digital collections, including rare books, student honors papers, blueprints, photographs, yearbooks, and artifacts, just to name a few. Our extensive digital collections are also a large part of our collection, as well as UMW websites, campus blogs, and social media pages. I will begin the tour tonight, our virtual tour, on the second floor of Simpson Library in our beautiful Special Collections research room. This room opened in 1989, and it's on its own HVAC system, which keeps the paper happy and preserved through the years. We keep the temperature at 68 degrees and the relative humidity for this area at 45%. So it's a very stable environment for the collections that we have there. The design of the room was inspired by the British arts and craft poet William Morris in honor of the library's single Kelmscott Press rare book, The Golden Legend. Even in their day, the books that Morris produced were really quite beautiful, as you can see here. These books were made of his own paper, from imported ink that came from Germany, and also he used his own typefaces. And of course, they ended up extremely rare and beautiful, and we have this one copy of the Kelmscott Press in Special Collections. Some of you may remember, of course, the original Rare Books room, which was in Trinkle Library, and it had the big spinning wheel which sat outside, and that room opened in 1964. The start of the rare book collection was largely the creation of Dr. Dan Woodward. He was a professor in the English department here at Mary Washington, and he had noticed that scattered throughout the stacks of Trinkle Library were many rare and unique items. And he also felt that to be a university of scholarly stature, that Mary Washington actually needed to have a rare book collection. So the start of this committee was very modest. They had an appropriation of funds for only $500. The committee began collecting books, and they collected in 3 fields. Literature was represented by James Joyce. The sciences, Claude Bernard, who's a French physiologist. And the third area they collected in was really early bookmanship, the history of printing. Today, the rare books collections number over 2,500 items. And here you'll see one of the earliest. It's this example of 15th century papyrus and medieval writing. And our oldest book in the collection is Pliny's Natural History, dating to 1496. This was the year that Columbus came to America for his second voyage. So those are our earliest pieces in the collection. The library houses a notable science collection also. Here you see John Gerard's History of the General Plants, a 1633 publication, and the university is lucky to own a second edition copy of this massive text. It's quite large. You can see it at the end of the table, and it has over 2,000 original woodcuts. The first edition, unfortunately, was actually very inaccurate. They didn't have a botanist on staff when they did the first printing in the 1500s. So the edition that we own is actually a much more accurate botanical text. We also own several of Isaac Newton's treatises on optics and mechanics. Here you see Newton's 1731 treatise on the system of the world, showing the ability of the force of the sun to disturb the motion of the moon. One of our largest collections is that of James Joyce, and we have 14 different editions of his work, Ulysses. Here on the left, you can see what's really the most rare of those different editions, the one in the blue wrapper. Joyce's friend Sylvia Beach, the American woman who owned the bookstore in Paris, was the publisher. She had only opened her bookstore for 2 years. You may have heard of that famous bookstore, Shakespeare and Company. And she aligned with Joyce, and despite of her lack of experience, they actually got together and printed Ulysses. She would have only 1,000 copies published. Mary Washington owns number 522 of those 1,000 copies. The book is on handmade paper, and today only a very few mint specimens still survive, mainly because the paper was very fragile. And also, it's hard to tell here, but it's a larger size volume. So between those two facts and that there was only 1,000, which sold out in the very first month, this is one of our rarest books in the collection. One of my favorites to the right is the James Joyce Ulysses version, which has the Henri Matisse illustrations. There was an American publisher that offered Matisse $5,000 to do illustrations within that budget for Ulysses. James Joyce was very excited that he had this artist of such stature to be able to do the illustrations for his masterwork, but he did wonder if Matisse had actually read the book. And as it turned out, even though the book had been translated in France, Matisse had not read the book. And so he ended up pulling his illustrations from the epic poem, The Odyssey from Homer. And so the illustrations actually pertain to Odysseus, which in Roman mythology is Ulysses. And that's where his mix-up occurred. But it's a very beautiful book and one of the editions that we do have of Ulysses. Our last volume here is the Theater of the World Atlas. It's originally a 4-volume set, which was published in 1645 in Amsterdam. It's displayed on the table, and the atlas has vellum covers and handmade gold paper. If you look closely at the Virginia insert map, which is this one, and we'll open that up at the end of the talk so you can actually come up and see the map, you'll see that there's the Indian tribe Sikabek, which is very familiar to many UMW alum, there at the top. These maps are large files, so they're taking a little bit to load. The atlases also illustrate a paradox between a lack of accuracy and the Enlightenment drive for exploration. The map's geographical accuracy in this atlas is really very poor, and even by 17th century standards. And I'm going to give this a try, see if we can see right there. You can see the sea monster there in the book. Sea monsters actually were frequently placed on maps of this time period. When the map makers knew that there was probably something dangerous out in the waters, but they weren't sure what, they would put one of these sea creatures there. During this period, people also thought that there was an equivalent creature in the oceans for perhaps every creature that was on land. So you might have a sea bear or a seabird, and in this case, you certainly have the sea lizard. So it was an interesting time for map makers, and as they went through, you could also see that as navigational and technology improved, that the increase of these creatures would really begin to fade out. But it was a time for very fantastical and enjoyable works as you look through some of these maps. As their class gift, the class of 1964 donated close to $2,000 to the rare book collection, and the timing was opportune, and this is really how we have many of the treasures that we own today. If we were to purchase these volumes today, the prices would just be astronomical. There's no way we could actually afford the same collection. For instance, the Joyce book in the original wrappers, the blue one, they purchased in 1963 for $150. So they were very good at targeting, you know, what the collection would be and how it would go up in research value and also financial value. Today, the library unfortunately doesn't actively purchase rare books. We really just don't have the budget, but we have had some wonderful donations from our alumni members and faculty. Here you'll see that students frequently still use these collections. There's a class taught the history of the book that pulls from these collections, and this year, for the very first time, we had a freshman seminar called Booking It, where the students came in and used these collections. The other half of our house, so to say, is the university archives, and this is where we go and preserve our institutional memory of the institution and make it accessible to all researchers. In 1969, Dean Edward Alvey was appointed historian of the college with the goal to write the very first Mary Washington history. And as Alvey was beginning to gather his resources, he realized that there really was no single place on campus that a researcher could go. And he very much lamented this fact. And he must have had a large sway because in 1969, the very first college archives opened in the basement of Trinkle, and Barbara Alden was the first college archivist. Many historical objects through the years have found their way into the safekeeping of the archives, and two that always stay on view for the public are the groundbreaking shovel and the ceremonial mace. If you ever come to campus, they're located in the lobby of Simpson Library, so they're always on view. The shovel, which is here tonight, was presented to President Edward Russell for his distinguished service in opening the State Normal and Industrial School for Women. The mayor of Fredericksburg actually turned over the very first soil, that's with the shovel, and then President Russell took the second turn back in December 14th, 1909. I think it's ironic that tomorrow is actually going to be Founders Day for Mary Washington. March 14th is our Founders Day for the legislation. So it's really appropriate that we have all of these objects out here tonight. The retired silver mace is also there in the case. This was one carried by the academic marshal. The top of the mace bears the seal of the Commonwealth of Virginia. On top of the body of the mace is engraved, "Presented on behalf of the rector and the visitors of the University of Virginia." The four sides of the body have engraved the seal of Mary Washington College. On the other side is the University of Virginia. And you all may remember, many of you, that at that time in 1970, we were still Mary Washington College of the University of Virginia. And then interspersed around the top are dogwoods representing the state flower. It's really a very beautiful piece and was used for the June 1970 graduation for the very first time. The archives also has the sheet music and album of the alma mater, High on Mary's Hilltop. Irene Taylor from the class of 47, along with her friend Jean Crotty, entered an annual song competition among the dorms. And her song was so popular that it sparked a movement by the students who wanted to make the song the official alma mater. Alumni overwhelmingly approved the song, and it became the official alma mater in 1952. The university's colors are now blue, gray, and white, but in the very beginning, President Russell had said that they would be blue and green. I didn't even know that till I started doing some research for this, and I was like looking at all the different color changes. So in 1911, they were blue and green, and through those intermediate years, there were times when they thought about changing those colors, and this pillow reflects that. There was one time when they thought that maybe the orange and golds would be good, and quote, "The rich orange and browns of autumn leaves should be our colors." And so it wasn't though until 1938 that the official colors were changed to blue and white. And then in 1985, of course, we have what we have today, which were those three original colors. But I love this pillow. You can. We don't in the archives actively collect diplomas. I get that question a lot of times. But sometimes when we're getting donations, there are diplomas in there. And they're really very interesting to see the different designs through the years of what the different graduation diplomas have looked like. This one's a very early one from 1912. Good slide to stop in. These, of course, will be familiar to anyone graduating before 1975. They're the very infamous beanies. Excuse me, I'm going to get some water. Mary Washington had the custom of requiring freshmen to wear beanies for their first several weeks of the semester. Well, according to the 1969 rules for freshmen, were required to wear the beanies at all times except for Sundays when they were going on dates or when they were in their dorm rooms. And if you were caught without your beanie, the rules of 1969 said that you would have to perhaps go and get someone's mail, you could do their laundry, carry their books, or they could spontaneously request that you do a song and dance for them on the spot. But they did say that there would only be one task that you could be given at a time, which I thought was kind of interesting. So they wouldn't overload you and have you dance and do laundry together. The archives not only has the baton of the popular all-girls marching band, which is on the table, but oddly enough, in the archives, we also have 56 cutouts of each of the band members. They're a hand-colored photograph on these little wooden blocks, and they correlate to one of the marching band's photographs. And it's just an interesting collection. And the all-girl marching band was very popular. It was here at Mary Washington from 1939 until 1958. It was complete with majorettes, the white kick boots, and even the color guard. So it was a big part of Mary Washington history at that time. And lastly, I decided to showcase the one and only Petulant. This is a crazy-looking plaster mask that resided in Westmoreland Hall. Petulant was known to grant wishes for good grades. It could also help you out when you were dating, and it was just the good luck charm of Westmoreland. It first shows up in 1954 when I went back to look through the publications, and it's still going strong, as you can see in the 1980 photograph. Right down there, they are doing this ceremony, and here you can see right there is Petulant, and then Westmoreland Hall there in the background. An enterprising group of historic preservation students who were doing a museum techniques class and became worried about Petulant. If you notice, now has chips after all of these years, actually brought him over to the archives so he could find a safe and a good home. So I just think he's a lot of fun, and we do have Petulant in the archives. The University Archives also retains the papers and records of all Mary Washington's past presidents. You can read President Chandler's letter stating his desire to break up students' promiscuous automobile driving. You can also read President Combs complaining about students pinning notes to the dorm screen porches with their bobby pins. And on a more serious front, you can read President Russell's report of the only fatality during the Spanish flu of the chair of the history department, Virginia May Gulrich. She had actually gone home off campus to be with her family and passed away there, but the only fatality of that. We also have President Simpson's correspondence regarding Mary Washington's transition to co-ed in 1972. Scrapbooks abound in our collections in all sizes, and our earliest one dates to 1914. Here's a beautiful example. It actually says Kodak book. This was given to us by Helen Davenport Smith's daughter. Smith herself was class of 1919. And if you look up on the right, you can see the students gardening there on campus right in front of Monroe Hall. So it's really a nice example. Reunion weekend, we set up a table, and the special collections staff has actually gotten a lot of scrapbooks donated at that time. Here is one from the Hampton Gals, as they call themselves. And if you look on the right, I really love, there's Monroe again, and she's captioned that as the Study Hard building. And then at the top is Seekebeck, and she says, "Come and get it, beans going fast." So she just threw out this whole scrapbook. There's some wonderful annotated images as you look through there. Here, class of 66 scrapbook. There's an article inside on Peanut Week. What is Peanut Week? And if you look back, it would again, this whole series is some of the traditions of Mary Washington. But Peanut Week began a couple of weeks before Christmas. When you went into the dining hall, there were peanuts on the table, and you would select one, and inside would be a name that would become your secret pal. So you would trade gifts for about 3 days, and at the end, you'd have a new friendship. Interestingly enough, some of our scrapbooks actually have the peanut shells still in those. So that's what Peanut Week was all about, and another one of Mary Washington's traditions. From the late 1980s to now, the archives has just really grown tremendously, but we have not been able to increase our physical footprint. So in 2008, for the university's centennial, the committee took its first foray into the digital arena. And at that time, we digitized over 2,500 photographs and made them accessible to researchers. And so here's just a sample of a few of those photographs that I've linked to some of the Mary Washington traditions. Here you can see the daisy chain, which was the early spring ritual where the students went out locally, they picked daisies, made them into a chain, and then they would promenade in with those at graduation. Afterwards, they would bring the remainders back and festoon Virginia Hall, and this tradition actually ended in 1942. May Day here, for almost 55 years, was one of the most popular events in Fredericksburg and on the campus. One of the biggest events. It was initially intended for the victors of Field Day and also the May Queen. By 1968, with the Vietnam War all around, students really began to feel that it was outdated, and at that time it actually faded away, but it was here on campus for a very long time. Devil Goat Day is definitely still here, going strong. Devil Goat Day, the Thursday before the last day of classes in the spring, is Devil Goat Day. It's inspired by faculty member and junior class sponsor, Eileen Dodd. The tradition began in 1926 with juniors wearing a felt green goat symbol on their sweatshirts to breakfast. And not to be outdone, then the seniors actually countered with their own horned creature, which was the devil. And so through the years, you had even classes that would graduate, and those would be the goats, and then the odd number classes that graduate would be the devils. And so that tradition has continued. Also, originally, the festivities would go on for about a week, where pranks were pulled on the students, things like capturing the real goat that the goats had brought to campus. And later it became more of a sports day. And students now, they really covet those Devil Goat Day t-shirts. Of course, many of you may remember this photo, Junior Wing Week prank. During the 80s and 90s, the celebration took on perhaps a more mischievous tone, and furniture would be sometimes placed on Ball Circle or Jefferson Square. Or I'm a graduate of the 80s, class of 83, or you come back and maybe you didn't have a door on your room anymore. That had also been taken off. So this was a very popular event, and certainly thanks to Pass Bullet photographer Houston Kempton for sharing this particular photograph. It's really a classic of that time period. Halloween, described in the 80s as the biggest party and the biggest weekend on campus. The Multicultural Fair, which will coming up soon in early April, provides an entire day of events devoted to multicultural awareness, and the fair celebrated its 25th anniversary in 2015. Eagle Gathering, which one of our newer traditions. And the Centennial Collection also includes photos of notable students and faculty at Mary Washington, such as Venus R. Jones, who was the first African-American graduate at Mary Washington. She finished her chemistry degree in 3 years, graduated in 1968, and then she would go on to get her MD from the University of Virginia's medical school and would be breaking gender boundaries there, as she was one of the very first women to enter that medical school. Another of Mary Washington's standout graduates is Shin Fujiyama. He really exemplifies the ideals of service for Mary Washington. He was recognized in 2009 as a CNN hero, and he founded the nonprofit group Students Helping Honduras and helped raise thousands of dollars for the orphanage there. Of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge all the faculty and staff who were such a part of our lives during our Mary Washington years. And here's a shout out to one of my favorites, geography professor, Dr. Marshall Bowen. But you can look through the Centennial Collection, and there's a lot of photographs of different staff that you'll see through the years. In 2010, we had the opportunity to do a collaborative scanning partnership. And at that time, the library began to grow its digital collections. We digitized the academic catalogs and also the OBOD. All alumni magazines were digitized at that time, and the yearbooks. I think it's interesting, university archives has all of the yearbooks. There was only one year during World War I, 1918, that a yearbook was not published. And then there was only one other time in 1995 and 1996 that the yearbooks were combined. So all of the physical yearbooks are in the archives, and then you can also access and search all of those online now. They've all been digitized. Having the yearbooks digitized allows us to go through and individually look and find such wonderful pictures as this one of the photo of the, of the Rifle Club in 1918. This was founded for students to become efficient riflewomen during the war. There's also this great photograph of Nina Bushnell, who was the Dean of Women at the college from 1921 until her retirement. Her duties at the college were many and varied. She made all the room assignments and oversaw privileges that the students would have. She always dressed for evening dinners and taught students proper etiquette. There are many stories of Dean Bushnell, and it seems students either really liked and respected her, or as one student said, she was scared bug-eyed of her, and they were very wary of her strict enforcement of all the rules and regulations. Times were certainly changing in the late 60s and 70s. Here on Ball Circle, you can see, this one's from 71, actually 70, you can see the strike rally. The strikes were a reaction to the shooting of 4 students at Kent State, and colleges were protesting and students were not attending classes all across the nation at this time. So the yearbooks really give us a picture of life on campus and how that changed through the years. The Bullet was Mary Washington's student newspaper. It actually began publication in 1921. It's still going strong today. The name did change to the Blue and Gray Press in 2014. But again, you can look at these online. One of my favorites is this emergency mimeographed issue of the Bullet that was created in, I believe it's 1942, when the Fredericksburg flood happened, and the students were still able to get the paper out. And there you can see there was one of the dorms at that time. Cornell was a dorm at that time, and you can see the drawing of the students being evacuated down at the bottom of the dorm. All through the years, the students have continued to certainly have their funny side, especially when it came to April Fool's Day. And they had issues of the newspaper called the Foolet, the Bull Sheet. And oftentimes they would have fake news stories with headlines such as "Fountain Turns Campus to the Desert," or "Mr. Potato Head, Distinguished Visitor in Residence." So they're a lot of fun too as you go back and look through. Many people don't know that for a short time there was also an alternative newspaper on campus. It was called the Prometheus, and the staff looked at themselves as an extension of the Bullet editorial staff, and they wrote about things that kind of pushed the limits for things that would have been in the Bullet, such as legalizing marijuana or student and faculty relationships. And it was pretty short-lived. It was only published for 7 months. We've digitized all of the student handbooks going back until 1929. There's all the rules and regs through the years. And one bit of advice in one of the handbooks states that Mrs. Low Standard and her children gossip, irreverence, selfishness, snobbiness, and be blue were exiled from the college, and you shouldn't bring any of those with you. So there's many interesting rules as you look through that collection. We're continuously working on new digital collections, the WMWC newsletters, and we're soon to have up a collection of commencement programs. One of our most notable collections is that of Dr. James Farmer, civil rights leader and distinguished professor of history and American studies at Mary Washington from 1984 to 1998. In 1942, Farmer established CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. And on January 15th, 1998, President Clinton presented Dr. Farmer with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. An eloquent speaker, Dr. Farmer used his voice and actions to inspire nonviolence and integration. And in 2012, students of Dr. Jeffrey McClurkin actually put together this site. It's called In His Own Words, and there you can go and search Dr. Farmer's lectures. Our blueprints and architectural drawings collection contains plans for many of the buildings on campus. This particular digitization project was generously funded by the local community foundation as a grant. Here, the same collection, you can see a watercolor drawing of Virginia Hall. This one's from 1936, and if you look closely right in here, they even put the students, all dressed and right out in front. But these watercolors, we don't have them for all of the buildings, but they're really, really nice, and this was a great way to preserve that collection. Here you'll see another one has the column of Monroe on the right, and I pulled out a photograph to pair that with the Corinthian columns, and you can see the style there. You can download all of these. I've often thought they really make beautiful artwork. Some of the blueprints, the early ones, are quite nice and very detailed. In recognition of the centennial of Armistice Day, this fall the library opened a new digital collection of World War I posters. Our collection came from Frank Fayant in New York in 1951. He and his wife were Red Cross members, and they donated this collection. This is the first time we've had it digitized. If you remember, the posters hung for many years on the wall of Simpson Library, and these posters are from France, Britain, Italy, and the United States. And if you do have time this evening, up on the third floor of this building that we're in, outside of Special Collections, we've put together a World War I exhibit, which talks about what the faculty and students were doing here on campus during that time period. Some faculty actually went overseas and fought. The students very much participated in raising funds to help the war effort. But if you do get a chance, go up and take a look. In 2014, the library opened the Digital Archiving Lab to convert Simpson Library's rare and unique archival collections to digital objects and to support teaching and instruction across campus. With this facility, we've really been able to build new digital collections and even collections we didn't dream of. Here's a photo of students working with the herbarium specimens for the biology department. We bought this thinking it would be for rare books, a rare book scanner, and the rare book it has been used for, but the biology professor, when she was coming for a tour, noted it, and we've been able to scan the herbarium specimens and put those online, which has been a great collection, and the students, as you can see, have been able to participate in this full process. Many of you may remember when you used to have to bring the bound honors papers over to the library, and in 2014 we actually opened up Eagle Scholar. Now students submit all of their scholarship online, and this is also a great institutional repository for faculty research and all kinds of data and creative scholarship. So this is the final stop of our tour. Before I conclude tonight, I would really like to reiterate that all of these materials are open for research and invite you to stop by and see us in Special Collections, whether it's in person or online. After the Q&A, you're welcome to come down. I'll be manning the table of objects, and our digital resources librarian, Angie White, is going to be manning our digital presence. So if you're interested in how you go online and search for these items and more, because as I was preparing this, I realized I only touched on a very small number of the objects that we have. So do take advantage of that. You can see the books up close, the different objects up close. And again, thank you for having me here tonight to be able to have this opportunity to share with you all of our resources. And I welcome any questions on the presentation at this time.
So I'm a chemist, and the question I've got is, so William Morris is, his book, how stable is the paper that handmade paper that he made?
Right. It's wonderful. I didn't bring that one here, but it's made of linen rag. Today, paper is more than not made like the newspaper print that you see, and you know how quickly that yellows. But in these early volumes, even like the atlas you see here, it is what was called, they made paper back at that time out of linen rag and cottons. And so the paper is just beautiful. The whole book is beautiful, and do stop by. And it's a 3-volume set, and he even created his own typeface for the book.
We have a question from an online participant.
Sure.
From the class of 1968 from Delaware. This alum writes, what's on your wish list for the archives?
Oh, my wish list. One of the things I'd love to discover, as I mentioned, 1921 is when the bullet was actually, for the student newspaper, was first printed. But we are missing, there's some missing issues in the 20s and a few in the 30s. And interestingly enough, you can see a photograph of what the issue looked like in the yearbooks of that period. So you know they existed. So that definitely is one of my wish lists. We finally found a red beanie. For a long time we only had the beanies of the goats, so I'm happy we have that. Of course, there's also many projects that we'd love to get done. We have Dr. Crawley's interviews from the oral histories that he created to do the History of Mary Washington College book, and we just need funds to get those digitized and put that up online. So lots of things, but I think those bullets would be what I'd like to see.
No other questions?
I think there's one.
Do you continually accession things from current years?
We do. We're actually, we use Archivit, which is a web archiving service, and that's how currently we're able to capture the website, the UMW website. And I like to say, that's why I put in old and new, because so many people think that special collections is just old materials, and it definitely isn't. It ranges into, you know, yesterday's emails, especially like now, our president's papers, they're very much going to be more digital born than actually print. President Anderson was probably the last collection that had more print, so now things are going to be very much a hybrid. But to specifically answer your question, we've been archiving websites. Angie, who will be coming up, Angie's our digital resources librarian. She's recently been working on a project to archive UMW blogs, which has been a big project here. So we do, it's the old and then all the way to the new.
How do you address the problem of obsolescence of digital material? CDs, DVDs, 8-track tapes,
Yeah.
that sort of problem?
It's a problem. It's a big problem. And we try to keep up with it as most as we can. It does sometimes take funding to go back. Like for instance, the cassettes. They're small cassettes. We want to get those digitized so they can be put in a digital format. Sometimes, as you mentioned, because of the obsolescence, you might not even have the equipment that will still play these different items. And so that's why frequently we've had to send collections out. But you do try to move forward. It's always good, as they say, to keep several copies of your materials. 3 copies is what we recommend so you don't lose your data and keep them in different places. But it is a struggle. The struggle is real. And we try to move forward and changing the formats as often as we can. But I know we still have various pieces that we have not upgraded yet. And I think it's a growing, you know, electronics and digital images and materials are where the future is. And so that's a large part of archives today.
All right. Well, I think that's all for questions. That was a wonderful treat. Thank you
thank
so
you.
much. I'd like to invite everyone to join us in the lobby for refreshments after tonight's talk. And I'd also like to invite you to join us for Mary Wash Giving Day, which is next Tuesday, March 19th. We hope that everyone will be a part of that day by giving to the area that means the most to you at Mary Washington. And of course, one of the areas that you can support is UMW Libraries, which is home of the special collections. So there's some more information about Giving Day in the lobby. And we just thank you all so much for joining us. Be sure to come up and check out the collections and make sure to join us for dessert in the lobby. Thank you so much.
All right.